Welcome back to today's Explainer. We are diving headfirst into what has been an absolutely wild ride of a year. Our goal today is to take the incredibly dense, chaotic news cycle of mid-2026 and synthesize it into a clear, impartial breakdown. The first half of this year has been packed with historic shifts from the highest levels of global diplomacy down to unprecedented domestic gridlock. So let's look closely at the data and the executive actions driving all of these massive events.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the global stage, immigration and border funding, the 2026 election battles, and finally, culture and infrastructure.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the global stage, and some truly unprecedented foreign policy shifts. The second term of the current administration has been marked by decisive initial posturing that very quickly turned into some incredibly complex diplomatic maneuvering. We're tracking a really dizzying timeline here. Back in January, Operation Absolute Resolve captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Just a month later, the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a massive attack on Iran aimed at regime change which resulted in the death of its leader, Ali Khamenei. Yet, by June, the administration completely pivoted, signing a memorandum of understanding in the Palace of Versailles to end the very war it had just initiated. Talk about whiplash, right?
And the absolute cornerstone of that June agreement, a jaw-dropping $300 billion reconstruction and economic development fund for Iran, right alongside the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. To put that into perspective, this is a massive reallocation of global capital, and it triggered a 60-day negotiation period. While the administration is taking a victory lap, claiming they avoided a worldwide economic depression, Tehran is simultaneously asserting control over the strait and planning new maritime fees.
As you might imagine, a $300 billion fund has sparked a pretty stark political divide. On one hand, Vice President J.D. Vance characterizes the sanctions relief as a mutual benefit, a total win-win. Conversely, Senate Armed Services Chair Roger Wicker and several other lawmakers are sounding the alarm. They argue the fund makes previous international agreements look like a pittance, and that it essentially negotiates away the military victories they secured just months prior.
And that geopolitical friction, it is spilling right out into the open. The administration has sternly warned Israel against further attacks in Lebanon, insisting they respect the new peace process. Take this recent quote from the vice president, where he said, "If I was in the Israeli cabinet, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world." The U.S. is demanding a complete ceasefire on all fronts, placing immense, immediate pressure on Israeli leadership who insist on maintaining a security zone. This whole situation really highlights the unprecedented flexibility the executive branch is currently exercising on the world stage. In a recent Axios interview, when asked about the limits of executive power following the Iran conflict, President Trump literally stated that the war taught him there are no limits to his power, before quickly catching himself and adding, "I know there are."
Moving on to Section 2, Immigration and Border Funding, the domestic battlefield. While the global map was being completely redrawn abroad, things ground to an absolute halt back home. Fierce domestic funding fights triggered a 76-day government shutdown. That is the longest shutdown in United States history. It lasted from mid-February all the way to the end of April, and it centered entirely around a massive $38 billion funding package specifically for ICE operations, which ultimately passed as part of a broader $70 billion immigration package.
Now look at what happens to federal contractors operating ICE detention centers when that kind of money enters the picture. The financial impact is undeniably clear. Just look at this leap in revenue for GEO Group, a major private prison contractor. Their net income skyrocketed from roughly $32 million at the end of the previous administration to over $254 million. Those new federal contracts allowed them to reopen thousands of previously idle detention beds across the country.
And here is where it connects directly back to campaign finance. Large sums of what we call dark money, where the donor's identity isn't fully disclosed, are flowing into political action committees. Now, federal contractors are legally barred from making political contributions. Yet records show a $250,000 donation from GEO Group to a super PAC tied to House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan. And this happened just days after the passage of that massive budget bill that tripled immigration enforcement funds. Naturally, this has sparked formal complaints to the Federal Election Commission.
All right, let's dive into Section 3, 2026 Election Battles, the fight for the ballot.
With the midterms looming, the actual mechanics of how Americans cast their votes are under intense scrutiny in federal courts. An executive order was signed aiming to prohibit the U.S. Postal Service from delivering ballots to anyone not on a federally approved list. To
To actually enforce this, the USPS is drafting a rule to track mail ballots using barcodes. In response, a massive legal battle has erupted. 23 Democratic-led states are actively suing the government to block the order, and a federal judge recently ruled their lawsuit can proceed, citing unconstitutional interference that could fundamentally change how millions of Americans vote this November.
But it isn't just traditional voting making headlines. Have you heard about these prediction markets? These new tech frontiers in election wagering are facing major pushback. Platforms like Kalshi allow users to essentially bet on the outcomes of future events like elections. They're even enlisting major celebrities to boost their brands. But states like Nevada and Arizona are treating them as unauthorized sports betting operations, leading to state bans and the first major criminal crackdowns on the industry.
Okay, let's wrap things up with Section 4, Culture and Infrastructure. Milestones and a few blunders.
Culturally, 2026 has honestly been a year of wild contrasts. On one hand, we had triumphant deep space exploration. NASA's Artemis II successfully sent 4 astronauts, including the first woman and person of color, to circumnavigate the moon. That's the first crewed deep space mission since 1972. Back on Earth, the Obama Presidential Center celebrated its historic grand opening in Chicago. But on the media front, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting made the controversial, historic decision to dissolve itself entirely. But we have got to talk about infrastructure, because few stories this year are as surreal as the renovation of the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool in Washington, D.C. The administration spent a whopping $14.2 million to resurface the pool's floor. They used a highly sophisticated American flag blue sealant, promising everyone the renovation would last for a full century.
Well, shocker. After just a few days, the pool reverted right back to a murky green. When reporters started asking questions about the peeling blue sealant, the Department of the Interior pushed back aggressively. They actually issued a statement comparing the pool cleanup to recent global conflicts. They said, "Our National Park Service team is now vacuuming up the dead algae resting on the bottom, just like the destroyed Iranian Navy." I mean, literally equating local algae maintenance with global warfare.
And the irony here is just palpable, because that sealant started spontaneously peeling off and floating to the surface less than a week after installation. Tourists visiting the capital are actually scooping chunks of it out of the water. They're pocketing pieces of this failed multi-million-dollar beautification project to bring home as rather unique historical souvenirs.
We are seeing similar controversies when it comes to executive spending. Take the massive new 90,000 square foot White House ballroom. The administration repeatedly promised this East Wing modernization project was being funded by private donations. But actually, scratch that. Records show $352 million in federal funds from a massive tax bill were quietly redirected into the ballroom's construction accounts. And those funds were legally designated for Secret Service personnel and technology.
And to top off the aesthetic overhaul of the presidency, we saw the unveiling of a brand new $400 million Qatari-gifted 747 now serving as Air Force One. Presented as the world's most luxurious plane, it serves as yet another massive visual symbol of an administration defined by these high-dollar, high-profile projects.
So, as we bring this explainer to a close, we've got to step back and ask the big question. We've explored whiplash wartime pivots, a history-making 76-day government shutdown, a radically altered border enforcement industry, and intense legal battles over the simple act of mailing a ballot. The consequences of these events are absolutely monumental. So, how on earth will voters synthesize this incredibly chaotic landscape when they finally head to the polls this November?